Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we're going to be going over Gunslinger's weapons and Killing Floor 2 and ranking them in our tier list. We haven't talked about Gunslinger in forever, it feels like, because Gunslinger has not really gotten a whole lot of updates, but let's talk about him now. So first up we have our knife, our Bowie knife. This one is going to go to D tier. Keep in mind though, anything that I put in D tier besides probably the knife is more like a C or a B tier weapon compared to the other classes with Gunslinger, because Gunslinger is really strong right now. They've pretty much always been really strong, and for whatever reason, they really haven't been changed all that much. Not sure why. Knife is like the one exception to this. You're only going to use the knife if you're completely out of ammo with Gunslinger, which is not a good thing, or if you want to get value early on. You're probably not even going to use the knife to block and parry. Maybe against like King Fleshbound you might, but that would be the only time I could really see you doing it. Maybe against Hans if you're kind of lower leveled with Gunslinger. Otherwise, you're probably just going to be able to outrun pretty much all of your problems. That's one really good thing about Gunslinger. Nail Bomb is honestly pretty good right now. I'm going to put this one A tier. It wasn't a great grenade before. When it got updated, this is one thing that did get updated with Gunslinger recently, is that now it has a much higher chance of stunning, as well as it can deal more damage than it did before. Before, the Nail Bomb was really inconsistent. Sometimes it would stun enemies, but it almost never stunned the enemy that you were hoping it would stun. It never would stun like a Strake or a Husk or anything. It would just stun like a Crawler or whatever, assuming you didn't just outright kill it. So it was awkward to use before. It's still a little bit awkward. You can still blow yourself up with it easier than some grenades, although it doesn't do as much damage as like the frag grenade or the high explosive grenade, so less of an issue there. Then we've got the 9mm pistol. The 9mm pistol on Gunslinger is actually quite good, especially considering you just start out with it. So I'm going to put this one into C tier, where we've usually put it in D tier, and it's still probably a weapon you're going to fall back on. It's not going to be your go-to right away. But since it's a pistol, you get bonus damage with it. You can have rack 'em up with it, similar to Sharpshooter, which is also pretty nice. And you get faster reloads with it, because again, it's a pistol. All of that is really good on Gunslinger. Without those abilities, and this was just like base Gunslinger, then yeah, it probably would be just D tier like it is with most of the other classes, because you're not really getting a whole lot of value out of it then. And it's going to be a weapon that you fall back on. It's still going to be the same thing here. But it is a solid all-around pistol for Gunslinger. Then we have the 1858 revolvers. These ones are your starting weapons, and they're pretty decent. I would put these ones up into B tier. They scale pretty well with upgrades. They do high damage. They don't have too long of a reload. Again, you can put rack 'em up on them. All around a fairly solid option for Gunslinger early on. You could trade them out, though, for some better options later on, but they will serve you quite well in the first couple waves if you want to keep them. A single 1858, you're probably really not going to be using this. Unless you just pick it up on the ground, in which case it's fine. I'm going to put this one into D tier, though, because you're likely not just going to toss one of your guns away. Maybe you will if you're tossing it to, like, Survivalist, or you're tossing it to Sharpshooter early on, just to give them more of an option to fight with. Or maybe even support, if support brought extra ammo, chuck that over to them so they can have another gun to fight off the things with early on. All of those could be options, but if you just find it on the ground, you're probably just going to use it, or you're not even going to bother with it and just sell it later. The medic pistol is all around really solid and a great addition to Gunslinger's arsenal. This one, for the value, it's really hard to argue against this. The value is you get a one-weight weapon that can heal, and it scales well with upgrades. This does 60 damage when it's fully upgraded, goes from 15 to 60, which isn't that much stronger than like the base 1858, considering this does 50 damage to start out with. So it's not going to outcompete a lot of the pistols in that way, but you do have rack 'em up. You have the ability to heal. So I'm going to put this high A tier. I could see it being argued to S tier, though. I could also see it being argued to D tier, because you don't really need it. And in solo, yeah, it's not way great unless you just have one extra weight and you want to grab another weapon. Grenade pistol. This one's a weird one for Gunslinger. I'm going to put this B tier. You can have rack 'em up on this. You can actually stack all 5 rack 'em up with one shot. You can also have infinite ammo with this during Z time if you're level 25, and you have the Whirlwind of Lead, I believe. I think that's what it's called. So those two are really fun. It also scales well with upgrades. The grenade pistol gets pretty strong, and you get an explosive weapon now, so you can kill Fleshbounds even easier if you want to. You can also kill crowds with it. You can't hurt yourself with it. It's all around a pretty solid weapon for Gunslinger. Up next, we got the Winchester, and the Winchester I'm just going to put right up into S tier for Gunslinger. It's even better on Gunslinger than it is on Sharpshooter. You get high damage with it like you do with Sharpshooter. It scales incredibly well with upgrades. This thing gets like 200 damage a shot when it's fully upgraded, with a high rate of fire, and with faster reloads, thanks to Gunslinger not being restricted to taking either higher reloads or rack 'em up. You can have both with the Winchester, which is really strong. It also doesn't weigh that much. Just laying around. When it's upgraded, it still doesn't even weigh that much, so very solid weapon if you want to take it. Spitfires on Gunslinger. A single Spitfire is probably like D tier. You're not going to take a single Spitfire. You're probably not even going to take 2 Spitfires on Gunslinger a whole lot of the time. It's okay. It does scale well with upgrades. It does do okay damage, and it does have the fire effect, but you just have better options for tier 2s. Dual Spitfires probably like C tier as well. They're kind of whatever. If you take them, you probably won't have a bad time, but you do have some better options. Single Winterbite also probably like C tier. It is better than a single Spitfire because you can freeze enemies with it. Freezing enemies is usually more appealing, and it does actually even scale better than the Spitfires do in terms of upgrades. But still, you're probably not going to take one. One of them is just inconsistent. 2 of them is far better, and I'd probably put these into A tier. I could see them being argued for S tier on Boss Wave, which I think is fair because on Boss Wave you can freeze the bosses, which makes it really easy for you just to stack up tons of damage on them or for your team to do it. They also, again, scale pretty well with upgrades. Each upgrade gives them a decent amount of damage. They don't weigh too much. They're not too expensive to buy. They do count as explosive weapons, oddly enough. So Siren Screams can't actually break them. If you've ever wondered why your Winterbites aren't hitting Sirens, it might be because they're screaming and you're firing, and these are just being eaten up by them because they still count as explosive rounds. I don't know why they do that. I guess it's because they technically explode with the ice, but it's just kind of a wonky thing to get used to. A single 1911 is okay. Again, you're probably not going to take it, but it's not a terrible option early on. It does do pretty decent damage. They scale okay with upgrades. They're honestly not one of the best with Gunslinger upgrades, but it has low recoil. It's a classic 1911. Dual 1911s probably also B tier. They're okay. I know a lot of people really like them, and I used to put them into like D tier because their scaling wasn't that great, but in any sort of practical use, it's pretty indistinguishable between like a fully upgraded pair of 1911s and a fully upgraded 1858s. They work about the same. The 1858s will do more damage per shot. 1911s will have a higher rate of fire and more rounds, as well as a slightly faster reload. But if I put the 1858s up here, I feel like the 1911s have to go up there too. Centerfire, just like the Winchester, S tier, even higher than it, because this one has really high base damage, enough just to body shot normal Zeds. You get the scope on it, which is a plus or a minus. I like the Winchester sights, but I'm okay with the Centerfire sights. You get less shots overall, but it scales even better with upgrades. Piranha Pistol, one Piranha Pistol is okay on Gunslinger. I'd probably put this one again into C tier. You don't really want to go with one. One is not terrible. You can get it early on. It does count as a melee weapon. You can block and parry with it, which I don't know why they gave Gunslinger that. You don't need it, but it's a plus to it if you want to use it. You can just use it to bash enemies because it does higher damage than normal bashing attacks do because it's got the saw blade on it. You can potentially have infinite ammo with it too. And it does scale well with upgrades. It does really high damage with upgrades. Dual Piranha Pistols is probably S tier. They're not super ammo efficient. That's the one downside to them. So you will potentially need to pick up your saw blades or go picking up ammo or make friends with support. You can block and parry. They do really high damage. That's the main 2 things. You can block and parry and they do really high damage. So they're a really good gunslinger weapon for that. So a single deagle, you probably will buy a single deagle early on if you want, just because you're probably building to 2 deagles. They do decent damage. It doesn't weigh that much. It has long range. But what you really want is 2 deagles, because 2 deagles is easily S tier. Maybe above the Centerfire, it's hard to say. They are really good. You get a lot of damage per second with these. I would say Centerfire and Winchester are better early on with Gunslinger. Desert Eagle's better later on once you have the recoil reduction, because firing both of those really quick, it's kind of difficult to keep on target early on. Later on, it's much easier. Tons of damage per second, good scaling, probably like the most damage per second actually, at least reliable damage per second, and across multiple enemies too. And thanks to Rack 'em Up, you can stack these really high. Not really a downside to the deagles, in all honesty. Single Rhino, probably another B tier. Single Rhino is actually pretty decent. I like the sight on it, and the fragmentation shot that it has is pretty interesting. You can kill small enemies with it pretty well. Rack 'em Up works obviously pretty well. Dual Rhinos, probably A tier. These are a bit better in my opinion. They scale okay with upgrades. The fracturing shot is kind of nice to have. They do get kind of outcompeted by some of Gunslinger's other weapons though, so that's why I'd probably just put them to A tier. A single 2011, probably like C tier. You're not going to buy a single 2011, well, you will buy a single 2011 just so that you can build into dual 2011s, because dual 2011s, also S tier, tons of damage per second, really fast rack 'em ups, because every time you fire this, it's 2 rounds that hit, most of the time. So you get 2 stacks of rack 'em up, you rack that up faster, they scale, they have a little bit higher damage than the 1911s. Statistically, they're just a little bit better than the 1911s, but in practical use, when you get to fire out twice the amount of shots in the same amount of time, they are substantially better than the 1911s, so that's why I'd put them up here. Even if they are goofy looking, and I definitely prefer the regular 1911s look more than the 2011. Then we have the HRG Disruptor. This one's probably like a B tier weapon. This one's actually, well, it's actually maybe A tier. This one's still not bad. It's not as good as it once was, which is kind of disappointing because even before it wasn't overpowered compared to some of Gunslinger's other weapons. This one's awkward though. It's the unique medic pistol, or the HRG version of the medic pistol, where you fire out pretty strong shots per shot, and it is very weight efficient for it being a tier 4 weapon. It's only 4 weight. Those shots deal high damage. Its secondary fire fires out a purple shot, or kind of a pinkish purple shot. This does even more damage, and I believe has a chance to stun, but it's usually not worth using because it consumes 3 of your ammo, and it doesn't actually do 3 ammo worth of damage, so you don't really want to be using this. It used to do even more damage, so it was more of a high risk, high reward weapon, more rewarded more accuracy than anything, but once that got nerfed, it really didn't do a whole lot. And with its regular fire, it's okay. It does decent damage per second, but you can still usually beat it with a lot of the dual pistols. So, yeah, maybe I would put it in B tier. It's like high B, low A tier. It's still good, but it's not as good as it once was. Single 500 Magnum, I'd probably put this one up into A tier. Single 500 is still pretty decent for picking off things at a distance. Main downside, though, is for about the same cost, you can buy the Winchester or the Centerfire. Centerfire will just completely outcompete the 500 Magnum at the same price point, but still get rack 'em up, still does high damage, still has extra pen, so still really strong. It's just it's also competing with one of the best weapons in the game. Dual 500s all the way up into S tier as well, really high damage per second. Similar to like the Deagles. Deagles will have damage per second, the 500 Magnums, if you can keep up your rate of fire. 500 Magnums, though, you can punch through multiple enemies, and I love pairing these two together or pairing it with the Centerfire or anything. Really, the 500 Magnums are pretty good. Do have to get used to that recoil, though. They do have a lot of recoil, especially early on with Gunslinger. Once you have some levels and you have recoil reduction, they are a lot better. Single Glock 18 is probably S tier by itself. The single Glock 18 is probably the best single pistol in the game. It does pretty high damage per second. Not a whole lot of damage per shot, but that doesn't matter because you have extra damage with your pistols. You have rack 'em up. You can stack a lot of damage on it, even without that. And it's essentially like you just have the Vector with Gunslinger. That's already pretty crazy. The Vector's pretty good. Putting on a Gunslinger is even more insane. Dual Glock 18s I'd also put up into S tier. Maybe not even as high as the regular, just single Glock 18, because they do have more recoil. They are harder to control. You can no longer use them at that kind of medium to longish range. Now they're pretty much close to medium range, and that's about it. But super high rate of fire, really high rack 'em up. They do have extra weight on them though, so if you don't want that, maybe not the best. You could put them with the Centerfire and not upgrade. Just upgrade the Glocks and maybe upgrade the Centerfire. That's an option too. So this is where I'd put all of Gunslinger's weapons in Killing Floor 2. There's a lot of really great weapons and a lot of still pretty good weapons, not even some bad weapons. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me your thoughts down below on Gunslinger's weapons. What are your favorites? What are the best ones to you? Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos just like this, and if you'd like to have early access as well, you can. There are links down in the description as well as the join button down below. Thanks for doing that. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!